Part 19. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn. I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 199. The two of them were finally able to breathe. Shen Yu glanced sideways at Xie Zhou and asked, "What are you doing back here?" "I'll pick you up." Xie Zhou hadn't picked up his sword for too long and had been killing for too long. He gasped and said, "How can I get married when I go back alone?" Shen Yu pressed her back against him. "You said I would catch up in 7 days. Really?" Xie Zhou snorted coldly. "How dare you use such words to prevaricate me at this time?" "Hold on a little longer." Xie Zhou held her hand. "My father sent 3,000 Qingyun guards to take us back to Bailin. 11 Feng has already gone to pick us up and should be here soon." Their hands were covered in blood, and they were very sticky when held together, but neither one let go. Shen Yu said, "I also have reinforcements." "Where did you get the reinforcements?" Xie Zhou asked. Seeing that the Imperial Guard was not moving forward, Zhang An couldn't help shouting, "Come on! Come on for me! Go! Call the archers, I will shoot them into hedgehogs." Li Yanchang had already slid to the ground, leaning against the wall, looking at the chaos in front of him. Without a permanent ally, Zhang An abandoned him at this time. No one paid attention to him. His people had not come to kill him, and the people above him would not save him. Blood was pouring from his neck, and he couldn't hold it down, and his spirit was drained away with the loss of blood. He looked at everything in front of him and knew that he would not survive. Xie Zhou was not part of his plan, and Shen Yu's reaction was not part of his plan. He was too conceited and underestimated the enemy. Those are Xie Zhou and Shen Yu. Just a little bit of relaxation before victory can allow them to seize loopholes and opportunities. Why, it's not here yet," he murmured. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and the sound of horse hooves became louder and louder as it got closer. Shen Yu stared at the blood puddle on the ground, which rippled in the vibration. Shen Yu was overjoyed. "It's reinforcements, Xiao Chuan is here." But she took a deep breath and did not dare to relax, staring closely in the direction of the palace gate. Boom! The palace door was hit with a dull sound. Zhang An's expression changed. "Quick! We can't let them go." The imperial army pressed forward again, and the two of them fought to the death. Whoever blocked their way out of the palace would die. Boom boom boom. Continuous crashes sounded, and with the last roar, the palace door opened. "Sir," Xiao Chuan shouted on the horse, "my subordinate is late." Standing behind him were the men who had followed Shen Yu to Kikame to suppress the bandits. Shen Yu looked back at the majestic hall and could see the Forbidden Army brothers following her. She could not leave them behind. Xiao Chuan immediately shouted, "Don't worry, sir. The people from the 5 cities military and horse division will be here soon. Marquis Xianping has also sent his private troops back to the capital. We have to leave quickly. If we are late, we will be blocked." Shen Yu took another look at the main hall and seemed to be able to see Li Zhaonian looking in the direction of the palace gate. He raised his hand and moved the back of his hand outward, which meant to tell her to leave quickly. Shen Yu gritted her teeth and said, "Let's go." Xie Zhou whistled, and a horse galloped over. He got on his horse, picked up Shen Yu and placed it in front of him, then galloped towards the city gate. "Come half of them, let me chase them." Zhang An chased after him. "Marquis Xianping has sealed the city gate, they can't escape. They must be killed." The people had long been hiding behind closed doors due to the changes, but they were able to travel unimpeded. The city gate isn't open." Xiao Chuan saw the closed city gate in the distance, and behind him were the pursuing imperial guards. "Sir, do you want to go to the north gate?" Xiao Chuan reined in his horse and asked. Shen Yu looked back and said, "I guess all the city gates have been closed. The only way is to break through. The road ahead is blocked and there are troops chasing behind. This is a tough battle. Shen Yu had already pulled out the yin feng from her waist and was ready to fight to the end. The heavy dullness suddenly made a sound and slowly opened towards both sides. What's going on? Xiao Chuan asked in shock. Auntie. Shen Yu suddenly looked around and saw Pei Chunli standing on the city wall, holding onto the wall stacks and looking at her. The door is open, let's go, Pei Chunli shouted. He was holding something in his hand, which was the token he had stolen from Marquis Xianping. He was no longer the simple child who knew nothing. His father taught him to be an upright person, so he chose to stand on the opposite side of his father. Pei Chunli. Shen Yu murmured his name. Xieting Zhou made a quick decision and rushed to the city gate with his whip raised. Everyone quickly left the city. Close the door, Pei Chunli held up the sign and ordered. The city gates rumbled shut, blocking Zhang An's men in the city. Damn it, Zhang An stopped his horse, Xianping Hao's good-for-nothing son is ruining my good deeds. Commander one of the Imperial Guards asked, what should we do now? Zhang An said, smash, I smashed the city gate. Pei Chunli ran to the other side. After saying goodbye this time, we might never see each other again. He wanted to take another look at his most cherished friend. Ah you, Pei Chunli murmured Shen Yu's name, leaning on the wall and looking around, and finally saw Shen Yu in the crowd. Shen Yu, he raised his voice and called her. Shen Yu turned around on her horse and saw Pei Chunli looking at her against Chang Feng. Pei Chunli smiled with tears in his eyes, took a deep breath and shouted, I'm sorry. It's okay, Shen Yu's eyes turned red, it's not your fault. Pei Chunli nodded. Although her voice was not loud, he seemed to understand what she was saying. She really didn't blame him. He raised his hand to his mouth and shouted, Auntie, does this count as giving you something back? You don't owe me anything. Pei Chunli, then can we be friends again in the future? Yes, Shen Yu shouted, you will always be my friend. Pei Chunli smiled happily, let's go. Let's go. My father will come back soon. Puff. Pei Chunli's voice stopped abruptly as the sound of an arrow sinking into his body. Shen Yu's eyes widened in horror, and her face turned extremely pale in an instant. Pei Chunli looked down and saw half a bloody arrow pierce through his chest. He could no longer summon the energy to shout, so he could only open his mouth and whisper, go quickly, go quickly. Anan. Shen Yu cried heartbreakingly. She struggled to roll over from Xieting Zhou and was held tightly in his arms. Xieting Zhou reached out and covered her eyes, not wanting her to look anymore. Shen Yu pulled his hand down and saw Pei Chunli leaning forward while leaning against the wall. Go quickly. Go quickly. His body finally lost his balance and fell down from the towering city wall. The wind fluttered his robe, as if it wanted to take him somewhere. Pei Chunli. Shen Yu cried so hard that she was pressed tightly to her chest by Xieting Zhou, and she ran towards home in the strong wind. Xieting Zhou hugged her tightly and looked back at Shengjing. The place he had wanted to escape from. Today, they left in embarrassment, and they will eventually return here in the future. Use the enemy's head as a blood sacrifice. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 200. Corpses have piled up in the square outside Suanhui Hall, and the wind carries a strong smell of blood, but the fighting is still going on. The princes and concubines had already hid in the palace and did not dare to disturb the sick Emperor Tongxiu. They could only hide in the corner and cry silently. Li Yanchang's vision had begun to blur and he couldn't see clearly in the distance, but he could hear the sound of killing. Li Jifen knelt down beside him, seventh brother. Li Yanchang's blood was almost gone, and he made a roaring sound in his throat, help, save me. You are finally afraid of death. Li Jifen laughed, I thought you were really not afraid of death. Li Yanchang was not afraid of death originally, but he slowly tasted the taste of death in the passage of blood and time. He saw that there was no afterlife, only endless darkness, so he began to be afraid. Shen Yu's goal was achieved, she wanted to prolong his pain indefinitely. You have calculated everything, and what you got is today's result. Li Jifeng glanced at his neck and sighed twice. This knife was really neat. I didn't expect that she would dare to strike at that time. The Forbidden Army guarded the steps to prevent the rebellious Forbidden Army from attacking, but they were still at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. The rebel Imperial Army was gradually shrinking the encirclement. Kill the deputy commander made Shah's eyes red. We will win soon. Li Zhaonian did not retreat into Suanhui Hall, he wanted to remember today clearly. He wanted to figure out in the fishy wind what the purpose of all this was. Is it worth it? I don't know who set up the bow and shot an arrow towards Li Zhaonian. Just as he was about to hit, he was cut into two pieces in mid-air. Li Zhaonian, ninth brother, you. Just to survive, Li Jifeng threw away the knife he picked up from the ground. Li Zhaonian was just stunned for a moment, and his eyes were filled with relief. Everyone in the palace is wearing a mask, the emperor, the concubines, even the eunuchs and maids. They have two faces in front of them, one is for themselves, and the other is for survival. Li Jifeng took out the handkerchief to wipe his hands and asked, "Why don't fourth brother hide inside?" Li Zhaonian glanced sideways at Li Jifeng, "Where can I hide? You don't seem worried at all." Li Zhaonian looked in the direction of the palace gate. "I believe her." "But she's already gone," Li Jifeng reminded. "But she left a way for everyone to survive," Li Zhaonian said. "Wait a little longer." Amidst the loud shouts of killing, Li Jifeng faintly heard the sound of marching. "Deputy Commander," a Forbidden Army shouted, "the people from the 5 cities soldiers and horses division are here." "What?" The deputy commander felt a chill in his heart. He put aside the sword of a forbidden soldier and retreated hastily. "No, retreat. I can't retreat anymore, I've already moved in." "Where's Zhong'an? He left us and ran away. Don't you understand this? Don't you want to pursue him?" The deputy commander spit out a mouthful of blood. "Brothers, hold on for a while longer. When Marquis Suanping's army enters the capital, we will be the first to win." The Forbidden Army suffered more than 2,000 casualties, and half of the troops were taken away by Zhong'an, making it impossible to stop the reinforcements. The imperial troops all retreated to the palace gate, but were pressed back by soldiers and horses from the 5 cities. "Is this her backup plan?" Li Jifeng smiled slightly. "It's a pity that she came a little late." Li Zhaonian said, "It's not too late, it's because the battle lines were drawn too early. My father's order to capture Lao Qi was far ahead of the plan. The original plan was to capture Li Yanchang and Zhong'an's rebellion at this moment. The troops from the 5 cities arrived just in time to defeat the rebels. The Imperial Guard surrounded and killed him inside the palace gate, but the first change came from his father. That's because my father was so angry with Lao Qi that he couldn't stand it anymore," Li Jifeng said. Li Zhaonian sighed, "The second variable is me. I didn't make arrangements for the harem women and the rest of the brothers, so someone took her hostage and held her back." Li Jifeng thought for a moment, "Then the third variable is Xieting Zhou." "Yes," Li Zhaonian said, "she is holding Li Yanchang hostage. If the stalemate can last for a while, the troops from the 5 cities may be able to arrive." But she didn't predict that Xieting Zhou would come back, and she was willing to risk her life for her. Li Zhaonian's eyes were far-reaching. "This is her variable, and it is also our variable. There is no foolproof strategy in this world, only a desperate fight." Li Jifeng crossed his arms, and his enemy still looked as leisurely as before. She could not have been in a hurry to kill Li Yanchang, she could have delayed it a little longer. "For Xieting Zhou," Li Zhaonian whispered, "she is afraid that once reinforcements arrive, Xieting Zhou will not be able to leave." The soldiers and horses of the 5 cities soon surrounded the remaining soldiers of the Forbidden Army. He commanded Qi Ping to gallop his horse to the front of the palace. turned over and dismounted. "Your Highness, the general's rescue has been late. I hope your Highness will forgive me." Li Zhaonian looked at the square filled with blood and said, "Leave it to you, Commander Qi." "Yes. The general has taken the order." Qi Ping turned around and said, "The soldiers and horses of the 5 cities all obey my orders. Kill the rebels and the imperial guards without mercy." Li Jiafeng said, "Let's go in and see our father." Li Zhaonian stepped through the gate first and said to the prince and his family members who were huddled in a corner, go back to your own palace." The people in the palace retreated until only the 2 brothers and Emperor Tongxue were left. Li Zhaonian knelt in front of the dragon bed and called softly, "Father." Emperor Tongxue gradually opened his eyes. "Is it solved?" "The soldiers and horses of the 5 cities have taken control of the situation." "Where's Lao Qi?" Li Zhaonian and Li Jiafeng looked at each other and said, "He intended to murder his son and was executed at the door." "Emperor Tongxue, Shen Yu. She is still needed outside." Li Zhaonian lied without looking into his father's eyes. Whether it was hiding the person who killed Li Yanchang or lying to Emperor Tongxue, he wanted to protect her. "That's good, just stay here." Emperor Tongxue reached out and grabbed the hands of Li Zhaonian and Li Jiafeng. "I leave your brothers and this mess to you." Li Zhaonian's eyes turned red. "Father, don't worry, I will definitely do my best." Emperor Tongxue nodded slightly, looked at Li Zhaonian and said, don't let the country be ruined in your hands, never, never." Li Zhaonian felt the hand holding him loosen. He raised his head and saw Emperor Tongxue's eyes open, lifeless, filled with his unfulfilled ambition and unwillingness in his life. The bell tolls and the whales blow. Emperor Tongxue reigned for 19 years and ended his life in the sound of war. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 202. You shouldn't have come back, Shen Yu said softly, it's too dangerous. I really have a way to escape. The environment here is simple, but holding her in his arms Xieting Zhou felt at ease. I can go to the dragon's pool and tiger's den, and I can go to the mountains and seas of swords and fire, as long as you are here. Shen Yu raised her hand to touch his face. He must have rushed here overnight after leaving Beijing, and there was already stubble on his chin. She stroked it gently and said, I also liked to touch my father's beard like this when I was a child. Xieting Zhou laughed, then you touched me, do you want to call me daddy? You think beautifully. She took back her hand. Xieting Zhou held her hand and put it back on his face. I'll touch it for you. You don't have to call me daddy. It was quiet everywhere, and Shen Yu gradually started to feel sleepy. She did not forget to remind him, we can't stop for too long, we will catch up. Xieting Zhou only felt distressed, dragging her into such a situation, sick and still worried about the march. I know, he stroked her hair to comfort her, we'll set off as soon as dawn. There are still 2 hours left. You can get some sleep. You sleep too? Xieting Zhou turned his head and coughed twice, and Shen Yu immediately raised her head. You. It's okay, my throat is just itchy. Before she could ask, Xieting Zhou grabbed her head and pressed it on her chest. The breathing of the person in his arms gradually calmed down. Xieting Zhou gently moved her away to sleep on her stomach, and then he opened the curtain and left the tent. When 11 Feng heard the movement, he raised his eyes and saw the prince quickly walking around the tent and heading deeper into the forest. Xifeng suddenly felt something was wrong, got up and followed him. I'll go take a look. Changlia wanted to follow him, but he said, just stay here and stare at the tent. Xieting Zhou felt that he had gone far enough, so he held onto a tree and vomited out. He held it in for a long time, fearing that it would disturb her and prevent her from falling asleep. He did not dare to come out until she fell asleep. Hearing the footsteps behind him, he turned his head slightly, still breathing heavily in his chest, and said, "It's okay." 11 Feng came closer and calmed down when he didn't smell the blood. Fortunately, he didn't vomit blood. "Dr. Yu is accompanying me. Let him come and show the prince a look." Xieting Zhou gasped a few times and said, "Well, let him come over and don't disturb others." 11 Feng understood who the other person was referring to, but he was not afraid that people would know about it and it would reach Miss Shen's ears. When Shen Zhao saw Xieting Zhou leaving, he hurriedly ran to the tent to see Shen Yu and saw that she was sleeping soundly and her body was clean, unlike when they left the city and were covered in blood. It could be seen that Xieting Zhou took good care of her, so he felt relieved. Chang Liu followed step by step, waiting outside the tent. When Zifeng left, he asked him to guard the tent, and he had to guard it, but this was his brother, and he couldn't stop him from watching. Shen Zhao came out within a moment, and the two of them sat back by the fire. Chang Liu felt uneasy. The prince left in a hurry, then 11 Feng, and later he saw Dr. Yu also sneaking there, so he guessed that there was something wrong with the prince's health. Shen Zhao saw him staring in one direction with his brows furrowed, and turned around and asked, "What are you looking at?" Chang Liu was just innocent, but he was not stupid. Dr. Yu always passed by quietly because he didn't want to make any noise. Then he suddenly thought, "I was watching Zifeng shit, why didn't he come back?" Shen Zhao couldn't help but want to roll his eyes, folded his arms and leaned against the tree and closed his eyes. Dr. Yu has never diagnosed a pulse in such an environment. The sound of wind was passing through the forest, and the calls of wild animals could be vaguely heard. Dr. Yu held his breath and concentrated. After diagnosing the pulse, he asked Xieting Zhou some questions, and then said solemnly, "I have said long ago that the prince can no longer hold a sword. He fell ill when he came back from the palace a few months ago. Now that I have just been raised back, I have fought like this again, and now." "Will he die?" Xieting Zhou interrupted him. "This. Will he die?" Xieting Zhou asked again. Dr. Yu said, "In this battle, the toxins have spread again, but there is no fear of life for the time being. Just don't use force again. Your Highness, listen to my advice. The two toxins in your Highness's body are both highly toxic. It is not easy to reach a balance. If it moves, it will cause chaos, if it really comes dash." "I understand." Xieting Zhou stared at the moonlight in the forest. "Go back and rest." Dr. Yu said, "Fortunately, I brought the medicine that the prince often takes. I fried it and gave it to the prince to take later." "Leave it to me," Zifeng said, "I'll fry it." Dr. Yu nodded and left, and Xieting Zhou also walked back later. Zifeng followed Xieting Zhou. "Your Highness also heard what Dr. Yu said. Your Highness really can't use force anymore." Xieting Zhou glanced at him sideways. "When did you become so verbose?" Zifeng said bitterly, "Your Highness is the backbone of Balin. Of course I am worried." "I know," Xieting Zhou said, "don't tell her." A stove was set up in the lee of the woodland, where the 70,000-strong army rested. The sparks were scattered by the wind. Zhang An sat by the fire, looked at the resting soldiers, and said, "Master Marquis, we shouldn't chase anymore. We should go to the capital and control the Forbidden Palace in our hands." Marquis Xianping stared at the bonfire with dull eyes. "What are you doing in Beijing?" "Go to the capital to capture the crown prince and the emperor's grandson." Zhang An was a little excited. "It's still unclear what the situation is in the palace now. The situation will change drastically if it's too late. The Marquis must do it as soon as possible." Marquis Xianping murmured, "My son is dead, my two sons are dead, and I am no longer a heir. What's the use of having that position?" Zhang An didn't notice anything at first, but upon closer inspection, he realized something was wrong. Two sons. All dead? Marquis Xianping laughed and cried, "He wants money, I will give it to him. He wants the throne, and I will help him." Zhang En was frightened when he heard this. Could it be that Li Yanchang was actually the son of Marquis Xianping? Marquis Xianping suddenly turned to look at him, and Zhang En was frightened by his look. "You don't know," Xianping Ho said quietly, "it was Emperor Tongxiu who robbed my woman, so I asked him to raise my son for me, ha 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 ha." Zhang En didn't know why Marquis Xianping wanted to say this to him. Even if Li Yanchang was dead, his relationship with Marquis Xianping had not reached the point where they could express their feelings to each other. Master Ho, Zhang En persuaded, Master Ho is not yet in his destiny years, he is in his prime. If he takes the position of supreme leader in the 9th five-year plan, there is no need to worry that he will not be full of descendants in the future. Seeing Marquis Xianping staring at him intently, Zhang Angzhen was frightened. "Marquis, Lord Marquis." Marquis Xianping seemed to have come to his senses. "Yes, you are right." "Get him," Marquis Xianping suddenly shouted. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 203. The scene took a turn for the worse in an instant. Zhang En was only halfway up when he was half crouched when two knives were held across his neck. He didn't dare to move, and raised his hands. "Master Ho, what does this mean?" "What do you mean?" Marquis Xianping stood up and walked to him. "Let me ask you, in the palace, did you deliberately let them kill King Qi?" "What did the Marquis say?" Zhang En said anxiously. "It's Shen Yu." "King Qi was held hostage by Shen Yu after he entered the palace. I used the harem women and the emperor's grandson as threats, but Shen Yu couldn't get in. Don't give any chance to negotiate terms." Marquis Xianping narrowed his eyes. "What about my son Pei Chunli?" Regardless of whether the knife was on his neck or not, Zhang En did not dare to tell the truth. "I have already told the Marquis that it was Xieting Zhou. He shot and killed the young Marquis before he could get out of the city. By the time I arrived, it was already too late." As soon as he finished speaking, Marquis Xianping struck Zhang En in the face with a scabbard, making stars appear in Zhang An's eyes. Zhang En shook his head and said with tears in his eyes, "Master Ho and I advance and retreat together. How can Master Ho not believe me? My son Anan has a good relationship with Shen Yu. He stole my token just to let Shen Yu leave. My son is the most kind-hearted. He couldn't even send her away in time, so why would he close the door and not let her go?" Zhang En couldn't argue. "I told Mr. Ho that it was already too late when I arrived. This is also my guess." Marquis Xianping straightened up, staggered to the door of the camp, turned his back to everyone and raised his hand. "Kill Zhang En, Ho." His body was still stiff and his head had fallen to the ground. A soldier came forward and said, "Master Marquis, the rest of the Forbidden Army has been controlled by us." All of them said that it was not Zhang An's hand, but the arrow was indeed shot from the crowd. Who could have done it? No one pays attention. "It doesn't matter anymore." Xianping Hao waved his hand. "Then just kill them all." "Yes." Marquis Xianping stumbled into the tent, stroking the coffin in the tent with tears. "Son, there is no one to serve you below. Dad will send Zhang En and the Imperial Army down to work as cattle and horses for you. You will be the Earth Emperor below. You like Shen Yu, right? Do you want her to play with you? When Dad catches Shen Yu, he will send her down to be buried with you. Don't ever feel lonely. If you are, come to Daddy's dream and Daddy will chat with you." Marquis Xianping cried and hugged the coffin and shouted, "Anan, my son, it was my father who was wrong, it was my father who was wrong. Dad was wrong. The square in front of Suanhui Hall has been cleaned, and the mountains of corpses that had been piled up before have been disposed of. The corpses of the rebel imperial guards were transported to the outside of the city and burned in piles. The families of the imperial guards who guarded the Suanhui Hall could come to claim their bodies and pensions. If no one claimed them, they would be properly buried. The ground of the square was washed over and over with water, but there were still blood stains in the gaps. The smell of mugwort in the air masks the smell of blood, and the palace maids are burning atractalodes and mugwort leaves to prevent disease. Li Jifeng sat down next to Li Zhaonian, and the two sat side by side in front of the palace, watching the palace maids and eunuchs coming and going in the square. "This man-eating cage turns everyone into monsters," Li Zhaonian said tiredly. Li Jifeng smiled softly, "Don't you still remember your original intention?" Li Zhaonian sighed, "How many people want to squeeze into this mass grave, and they don't want to leave until they are only bones. But there are also people who desperately want to leave." Li Jifeng said, "We brothers couldn't get along before. I thought you were too rigid, you thought I was ignorant and incompetent, and no one looked down on anyone. I didn't expect that in the end it would be we're sitting here." Li Zhaonian looked blank and asked, "How many years have you been practicing martial arts?" 12 years. Li Jifeng leaned back on the ground and said casually, "When my mother-in-law died, she told me to learn to protect myself. She said that smart people in this imperial city die easily, but what should I do? I'm just extremely smart." 12 years is really not easy, Li Zhaoqing said softly. After being silent for a long time, Li Zhaonian suddenly spoke, "You have been hiding your power for so many years, not just to protect yourself. No one has seen through you. You are the one who hides it the deepest." "Yes, why not?" "Xieting Zhou and Shen Yu," Li Jifeng said. Li Zhaonian said, "They are naturally different. They are born strong, and they are definitely not things in the pool." Li Jifeng smiled and said, "Can you see clearly now?" Li Zhaonian was extremely tired. "If you want this throne, just take it. I can write an imperial edict on the throne to keep my wife and children safe." "What do I want to do with this throne?" Li Jifeng said, "This country is on the verge of collapse. Whoever wants to sit in that shabby position can sit in it, but I won't sit in it anyway." "Then what do you want?" Li Zhaonian asked with a frown. Li Jifeng stood up, looked down at him and said, "Li Zhaonian, you have to admit that you can't save the world, and neither can I, but there has to be someone in the world who can stand up and hold on to this mountain and river." Li Zhaonian was stunned for a moment and looked up at Li Jifeng. Li Jifeng looked into the distance with light surging in his eyes. Xieting Zhou restrained his edge and pretended to be a prodigal in order to fulfill his loyalty to the emperor. What did he gain? Who would believe that he would not rebel? He handed over his military power. It's death, and it's death if you don't cooperate. But if he doesn't move forward, it will be a disaster for all people. There must be someone or an opportunity to push him forward. Li Zhaonian looked at the square. "You mean?" "That's right." Li Jifeng had already guessed what he wanted to say. "My father was worried that he would rebel, but I was eager for him to rebel. I originally wanted to kill Shen Yu in this turmoil." "You?" Li Zhaonian stood up immediately. Li Jifeng glanced at him. "Kill Shen Yu and Xieting Zhou will rebel. Fourth brother, the reason why we can live in harmony now is because we have the same purpose. We don't want to sit in this position, but we all hope for peace in the world. But if Xieting Zhou turns around, the world will be in chaos." Li Zhaonian looked solemn. "The result is that the people will not live in peace. Isn't it true that the people are in dire straits now? More and more people are starving to death every year." Li Jifeng said contemptuously, "You don't understand the principle of building up after breaking down, right? Which change of dynasties since ancient times was not a river of blood? Wasn't it a river of blood when the Zhou dynasty overthrew the tyrannical previous dynasty? Wasn't it also called a rebellious minister and traitor? But the Zhou dynasty brought peace to the people for nearly 200 years. Li Jifeng said excitedly. but the giant trees will decay. In the past 100 years, one generation has been worse than the other. At this time, another giant tree is needed to hold up the mountains and rivers. The people have waited for 100 years for this opportunity to thank Ting Zhou. Li Jiafeng said word by word. He can't retreat. He, Xie Ting Zhou, must do the job for this traitor and traitor. Li Zhaonian took a step back hastily. He originally thought that his idea was outrageous enough, but at this moment he had to admit that Li Jiafeng's idea was even worse. But Li Jiafeng was right. Only by breaking down and then standing up can there be new life. If you hand the throne to him, will he sit on it? He won't, Li Jiafeng said with a smile, but he has no way out now. He has no choice but to rebel. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 204. The army marched like this for 2 days, and no trace of the pursuers was found along the way. Bai Yu sent out sentry and came back without any warning. Xie Ting Zhou stroked Bai Yu's hair, fed him something and let him play by himself. We are already 300 miles away from the capital. It is impossible to run like this. Both men and horses need to rest. Otherwise, if the pursuers follow up later and they are unable to fight, we will camp here to rest today. 11 Feng went down to make arrangements. Shen Yu's body has recovered and she rides alongside Xie Ting Zhou. Xiao Chuan hasn't come back yet. Shen Yu was a little worried. Xiao Chuan used to work as a scout in the Xiao family army, responsible for detecting the enemy's situation. Yesterday he ordered a group of people to go out in 3 small teams to detect the pursuing soldiers, but he had not returned yet tonight. Xiao Chuan is very vigilant. Shen Yu is not worried about anything else, but she is worried about him being ambushed on the road. The army set up camp and dug stoves to make fires for cooking. I passed by a city today and sent people in disguise to purchase a lot of things. I also learned about the death of Emperor Tongxiu. Prince Li Zhaonian will hold a succession ceremony in half a month. Finally, there is no need to chew dry food tonight, everyone can have a hot meal. Chang Liu squatted by the fire and chewed chicken legs until his mouth was full of oil. As he gnawed, he said, "This is a really good escape. There are still chicken legs to eat. It's thanks to Shizhi. No, it's thanks to our future princess who has money. They are all shops." 11 Feng held the beef soup. "Do you think everyone has chicken legs to eat?" Chang Liu chuckled, "That's because I'm still growing. It's because our future concubine felt sorry for me that I was still growing, so she gave me her share." Zai Feng groaned, "She's not much older than you. She doesn't grow taller." Chang Liu was stunned when he thought about it. "It seems so." 11 Feng ignored him. Chang Liu finished chewing the chicken legs, crossed his arms and muttered about his little turtle for a while. He didn't know if Uncle Zhong had taken care of him along the way, but he was worried. "Brother Feng, please accompany me to the toilet. I feel like squatting in a pit." 11 Feng hadn't finished the soup in his bowl, but he lost his appetite when he said, "Go aside." "But I'm afraid." Chang Liu grabbed his arm and rubbed his clothes until they were all greasy. Zai Feng threw away his hand in disgust, finished the soup and stood up. "Aren't you leaving yet?" Chang Liu hurriedly followed step by step. It was extremely quiet in the forest. 11 Feng was not too close to Chang Liu and found a tree to lean against with his sword. Chang Liu called him from time to time, fearing that 11 Feng would leave him behind. "Do you think there might be a ghost in this forest? Can you hurry up?" Zai Feng urged impatiently. "Brother Feng, listen." Chang Liu pricked up his ears, holding in his fart and not daring to let it go. "It seems there is someone." 11 Feng listened for a while and said, "What kind of people can there be in the forest where birds don't poop? What are you afraid of? What if it's not a human being? What else could it be but a human being?" Chang Liu thought for a while, then shuddered and became even more frightened. He listened for a moment and found some subtle sounds besides the wind. There is really someone approaching here, Changliu said again. No, I have to go up and have a look. Changliu pulled up his pants, jumped up to the tallest tree, and saw a group of people approaching the camp in the dark. Brother Feng, someone is coming, he whispered. 11 Feng was alert for a moment, and just as he was about to give a warning, he heard Changliu say, wait a minute. Prince, Crown Princess Changliu ran quickly to the camp, shouting, it's Xiao Chuan and the others who are back. Shen Yu's focus was entirely on the last sentence, Xiao Chuan is back. She didn't pay attention to the previous sentence, Princess Concubine, and walked out of the tent quickly. Xieting Zhou glanced at Changliu and said as he passed by, Changliu, I'll reward you with the chicken drumsticks in the tent. Changliu laughed happily, the shout of the crown princess was really worth it. Xiao Chuan and the others were all in a state of embarrassment, and they wolfed down the hot soup when they came back. Shen Yu sat by the campfire and looked at him. Did you meet the pursuers? No, Xiao Chuan said bluntly, when I met a refugee, I almost took off my pants. After saying that, Xieting Zhou glanced at him, and quickly put away his military ruffian look, and said seriously, Sir, my subordinates searched all the way and found traces of the pursuers. The places where they camped were all belonging to the imperial army. The corpses, as well as Zhong'an, were beheaded and hung on a tree, and the lower body was eaten by wild dogs until only the bones were left. Xiao Chuan swallowed the last mouthful of soup and said, there are no other corpses except the Forbidden Army. I suspect that Zhong'an and Marquis Xianping had an internal strife. Marquis Xianping planned to kill all Zhong'an's people. Shen Yu stared at Huo, it's a pity that I couldn't kill him with my own hands. Xieting Zhou stood beside her. He knew that she was thinking of Pei Chunli's death, so he put his fingers on the back of her neck and squeezed gently to express comfort. Keep talking, he motioned to Xiao Chuan. Oh, yes, Xiao Chuan was not under Xieting Zhou's jurisdiction, but he felt that this man was so imposing that he always made people feel shorter. Later, we followed their evacuation traces to investigate. Suanpinghao's 60,000 people collided with the people of Nanda camp and started fighting. However, the fighting was not fierce. Suanpinghao retreated while fighting and headed towards Lu, fleeing in the direction of the state. Luz, who is the fiefdom of King Duanqing, Xieting Zhou said. Shen Yu raised her head and looked at him, this just buys us time. Yes, Xieting Zhou also lowered his eyes to look at her, but did not move his hand. Marquis Xianping fought and retreated at the same time to preserve his strength. The south camp did not have backup supplies. I wanted a quick victory. Marquis Xianping only needed just delay. The two of them moved intimately, and the others only dared to listen but not to look. They either lowered their heads or stared at the fire. Except for Changliu, who stared straight at him, Zifeng pressed his head down. How many troops does King Duanqing have in his fief? Shen Yu asked. Xieting Zhou said, 30,000, maybe more. Then Marquis Xianping wants to seize King Duanqing's fiefdom and establish himself as king. Shen Zhao also came over after hearing the news. I don't think so. Xieting Zhou retracted his hand and sat down next to her. He dared to retreat to Luzhu without being afraid of being attacked from both sides. It shows that he is sure that Luzhu is safe. It seems that he and King Duanqing are safe. There has been collusion for a long time, and maybe King Duanqing had a hand in training his private soldiers. Shen Yu also stared at the fire, wishing to put the two of them on the fire to roast them. Those 60,000 soldiers were raised with the people's tax money and the granary of Dezhou. Xieting Zhou said, the current situation is not entirely beneficial to us. No matter which side is facing enemies on two sides, Suanpinghao has to deal with the imperial soldiers, and he also has to beware of Balin, the imperial court, and we are also facing two sides. Pincer attack and contain each other. Daz, who has no money, Shen Yu said, the Ministry of Revenue has no money to support the war. Xiao Chuan nodded, then we can live a stable life for a while. After he said this, he saw that the three people's brows did not loosen. "What are you worried about, sir?" Xiao Chuan asked. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 205. Shen Yu looked at Shen Zhao, and Shen Zhao answered, "I'm worried about Yanliang Pass." Xiao Chuan asked without confidence, "Didn't the crown prince drive away the Zihu people last year?" Shen Zhao sighed softly, "It's not stable. Last year, the Zihu people were beaten away. They might come back this year. The Zihu people make a living by nomadic herders. The pastures can't support people in winter. Now the great Zhou dynasty is in turmoil and winter has come. The former Zihu people may take this opportunity to loot the border and steal money and winter rations. Shen Zhao has been stationed at Yanliang Pass all year round, and what he said is probably right." "You stupid Zihu people," Xiao Chuan had just cursed, but felt that he was rude and scratched his head. I. "It doesn't matter." Shen Yu stood up, "Follow me, I have something to ask you." Xiao Chuan stood up and followed him. Chang Liu watched the two people walk away, then looked at Xie Tingzhou. "Your Highness, aren't you going?" Xie Tingzhou glanced at Chang Liu. "Am I so clingy?" Chang Liu pursed his lips and whispered, "Yes, I don't know who it is. I can't live without someone these days." Shizhi walks away and looks for someone else after a while. Xie Tingzhou didn't hear clearly. "What are you muttering about?" "No," Chang Liu said loudly, "I mean that our crown princess cannot live without the crown prince, and she will miss the crown prince if she goes far away." "The crown princess," Shen Zhao said, "she's not married yet." "General, don't pay attention to these details. Sooner or later, I will shout in advance," Chang Liu said. Xie Tingzhou didn't want to talk to him anymore and looked sideways at Shen Yu and Xiao Chuan as they stopped by a tree. Chang Liu turned to 11 Feng and said, Look, my eyeballs are all sticky." Xie Tingzhou didn't look back. "I heard it, 11 Feng, shut his mouth for me." "Sir, what do you want from me?" Xiao Chuan stopped in front of Shen Yu. "Yes," Shen Yu said, "you have worked hard these past 2 days." "That's right," Xiao Chuan said with a smile, "isn't that what scouts do?" Shen Yu asked, "I'm very curious, why didn't you stay in Shengjing? You were the one who transferred the people from the 5 cities military and horse division, and you were the first to arrive. You were the first to stay and protect the prince. Why can't you be successful in the future? But you just chose to follow me." Xiao Chuan became anxious when he heard this. "Sir, are you doubting my motives?" "No," Shen Yu said calmly, "if I doubted you, I wouldn't let you go find out the information. Since we are going to travel together in the future, we might as well open up and talk." Xiao Chuan was tired after running for 2 days. He squatted down and said, "Since your excellency said this, I will tell you the truth. What does the 5 cities military and horse division do? Patrol thieves, clear streets and ditches, arrest prisoners, and ban fires. These are just trivial things. If I live like this all my life in the capital, I will be useless. I came down from the battlefield. I still want to go back to that place. Besides, I don't want to serve that kind of court anymore. The soldiers we follow you this time are all voluntary, and they all went to Kikane with us." "Soldier. What you have seen along the way, sir, we have also seen. Whoever is willing to be loyal to the imperial court will go. We good men are not born to communicate with them or to find cats and dogs for those high-ranking officials." "My lord, do you think what I said is high-sounding?" Xiao Chuan raised his head and glanced at Shen Yu, and then said, "Then let me explain it more clearly. The prince has soldiers and you have money, so why worry about not being able to put an end to this troubled world? Xiao Chuan knelt on one knee on the ground before Shen Yu could speak. Look, look, Chang Lu from a distance poked Zai Feng, why are you still kneeling down? No, 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 I have to go over and eavesdrop. Before 11 Feng had time to hold him down, Chang Lu slipped away like a loach. My lord, Xiao Chuan raised his head, Xiao Chuan is willing to follow your lord. Whatever you say, I, Xiao Chuan, will never say anything. Shen Yu frowned slightly, you get up first. Xiao Chuan stood up and looked at Shen Yu. She was obviously half a head shorter than him, but he didn't feel at all that she was inferior to men. She was even stronger. This was why he was willing to follow her. Shen Yu thought, this world is far less tolerant to women than men. Aren't you afraid of others ridiculing you for following a woman? Let them decide, Xiao Chuan said nonchalantly, I, Xiao Chuan, admire the strong. The prince and your lord are both such people. The prince has King Yun guards. I, Xiao Chuan, could not stand out in the past. Shen Yu smiled lightly and said, you are very honest. Xiao Chuan scratched the back of his head and said, the adults told me to speak openly. Okay, Shen Yu nodded and said, from now on, everyone will advance and retreat together. I will have food to eat, but you will not be hungry. Xiao Chuan smiled honestly, sir, you are joking. If I follow you, I will starve to death. Then there will be no one alive in this world. Chang Liu ran back as fast as he could, important news. Xie Zhou was holding a stick and drawing pictures on the ground with Shen Zhao to analyze the situation. Hearing this, he replied, what? Chang Liu had a solemn look on his face, the one named Xiao said he admires our crown princess. What? Shen Zhao exclaimed. At the same time, the stick in Xie Zhou's hand broke into two pieces. He raised his eyelids and looked at Chang Liu, what did you say? The person named Xiao said that he admires our crown princess, and also said that he admires the crown prince. If it weren't for the last sentence, Xie Zhou would have been ready to stand up. Chang Liu wondered, how come he doesn't care about men and women? 11 Feng covered his mouth. Let him say it, Xie Zhou said, that's what he said. Chang Liu pulled 11 Feng's hand away, he said that he admires the strong. Both the crown prince and the crown prince are such people. Stop it, Xie Zhou raised his hand and pointed, I don't want to hear him talk before lunch tomorrow. Chang Liu was dragged away by 11 Feng, covering his mouth and babbling. After the conversation on the other end, Shen Yu and Xie Zhou returned to the tent. Xie Zhou lifted the curtain for her, have you gained a general? What's wrong? Shen Yu joked with him, he didn't choose you and chose to follow me. His Royal Highness is frustrated, right? Traveling all the way these past few days, the two of them had no time to be intimate. She raised her face like this, which made Xie Zhou want to kiss her. That's not true. Xie Zhou's gaze moved from her eyes, to her nose, to her lips, caressing her face with real substance. He leaned forward slightly and said softly, I followed you first. If he wants to come, he has to line up first. Anyone who lines up after me, Xie Zhou, has no chance. Shen Yu's cheeks heated up when he saw her, but she was thinking about business, I need your help with their future arrangements. Say, Xie Zhou responded to every request. Shen Yu thought carefully and said, I can't take them to Hezhu. I'm afraid I will have Xiao Chuan lead his troops to follow you back to Balin. Xie Zhou's charming heart was immediately cleared by these words. He straightened up and the smile on his face disappeared, you won't go back to Balin with me. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 206. Shen Yu saw his expression change and hurriedly persuaded him, I haven't been back to Hezhu to see my grandmother for a long time. There is not much time left for us to breathe and rest. When the war breaks out, there will be no chance. I want to go back first look at her. Besides, I had to go to the accounts every year in the past. Even though the shopkeepers below are all born into the same family, people's hearts are so weak that there won't be people with evil intentions. I'm afraid that someone will deceive my grandmother because she is old. Xieting Zhou nodded. It's time to go back, and I should go too, but now. I understand. Shen Yu's eyes were bright. I'll talk about the rest later. Xieting Zhou pushed a strand of hair from her temples back behind her ear. You go to Hezhu first. After I return to Balin and check the situation, I will go to Hezhu to pick you up. Shen Yu nodded. Want to take a walk? Good. It was starting to get cold at night after the beginning of autumn. Xieting Zhou took the cloak and led her out of the tent. 11 Feng wanted to follow, but Xieting Zhou blocked him. Only Bai Yu spread his wings and flew in front of them. They usually choose a place close to a water source when they are stationed. There is a small river next to the forest, and the moonlight breaks into stars on the water. Xieting Zhou led her along the river. You can't take so many people to Hezhu, but you have to take at least some of them. Take more than 1,000 people with you. You don't need to go to the city. We can find a place to stay in Hezhu. We are in Beijing. If there is such a big commotion in the country, if the state government is not good for the Lu family, it is better to take care of it. Shen Yu said, the goal is too big and it is difficult to move. We have to hurry. I want to keep a low profile on this journey. If it is confirmed that Li Zhaonian ascends the throne, there is no need to worry about the problems of the prefectural government. Li Zhaonian is not that kind of person. Xieting Zhou slowed down and asked, how long have you known him and you trust him so much? Shen Yu turned her head to look at him. The moonlight was not bright enough to see whether there was jealousy on his face. Actually, he already knew that I was a woman at Beishan hunting ground, but he did not expose me or use it as a threat. I believe in his character. He is a kind-hearted person, Xieting Zhou said, but being kind-hearted and soft-handed cannot suppress those veteran ministers who form cliques. Isn't there Zhang Yuanqing? With his assistance, the head of the household department is Li Zhaonian. He holds the lifeblood of Dezhou in his own hands. Speaking of the head of the household department, Xieting Zhou thought of Zhang Lianzi. Since Ji Liangji was beheaded, Zhang Lianzi has been in charge of the household department. Taking the position of Minister of the Household Department at a young age is already beyond his control, and he is not qualified enough to move up. But now he is in charge of the Household Department. It's the same as a minister. I feel strange about something, Xieting Zhou said. Shen Yu said, what's the matter? Xieting Zhou stopped and stood face to face with Shen Yu. My hostility towards this person is far beyond my imagination. It's like. He couldn't find the right words. What does it look like? Shen Yu looked at him seriously. Xieting Zhou had a flash of idea. It's like he snatched you away from me. I wish I could tear him into pieces. Do you think, do people have past lives and afterlives? Shen Yu's face froze. She had never mentioned anything about her previous life to Xieting Zhou. Before she could answer, Xieting Zhou looked at her and said seriously, I don't remember my past life. You are mine in this life and in countless future lives? Hezhu and Balin are not in the same direction. We set out at dawn the next day and marched until noon, when it was time to part ways. Shen Yu and Xiao Chuan had talked in the morning. Xiao Chuan wanted to follow her to Hezhu. Shen Yu told him that if he followed, the 5,000 troops would become ownerless soldiers. Who would restrain them? Xiao Chuan was still persuaded, and the final result was that Xiao Chuan took 5,000 soldiers and horses with Xieting Zhou to Balin, and Xieting Zhou assigned 10 more skilled soldiers to escort Shen Yu all the way to Hezhu. The dozen or so men and horses had already gone far away, and the yellow sand kicked up by the horses' hooves was blown up in the wind. Xieting Zhou stared for a long time in the direction she left. It was a long way to Hezhu, and it would take 2 or 3 months to go back and forth. Your Highness, let's go, Xifeng said, the girl has gone far. Xieting Zhou didn't speak. After a long while, he patted Bai Yu on the shoulder and said, go. Bai Yu flapped his wings and followed the direction Shen Yu left. Shen Yu heard Bai Yu's chirping and raised her head when she raised her whip. She understood what he was thinking. He was asking Bai Yu to give her another ride. Drive. Shen Yu took the lead and headed towards Hezhu in the flying sand. A carriage was driving on the official road. He put a bare hand on the window, glanced at the sky, and urged the driver to drive the carriage. Faster. It can't go any faster, the coachman said, this horse has to be able to run. The maid lowered the curtain and whispered, I think he did it on purpose. Calculating the money per day, he wishes he could run away for 10.5 years. The young lady's face was a little anxious, but she still maintained her ladylike demeanor. When we get into the city, we can change cars and start our journey tomorrow. The maid said, at this rate, we won't be able to enter the city today. More than 10 people rode on horseback, all wearing power fences to block the wind and sand. He Shenzhou stopped his horse and slowed down. Ping Cheng is ahead of us. Hurry up and get into the city before dark. Find an inn to stay overnight. Shen Yu took off the power fence and shook the sand on it. This road was not so difficult in the past. Shenzhou looked solemn. Autumn is a desolate day. The refugees have no food to eat and have eaten all the grass roots along the road. The road is naturally difficult to walk. Let's go. Everyone continued on their way, turned around the mountain col and walked onto a straight road. They saw a carriage parked on the side of the road in the distance. As I got closer, I vaguely heard a man and a woman arguing. Shen Zhao glanced sideways as he passed by, and after running about a mile, he suddenly reined in his horse. Shen Yu couldn't stop in time and ran a few feet away before turning around and coming back. Brother, what's wrong? Shen Zhao seemed to be stunned there, with confusion and disbelief on his face. He immediately turned his horse's head and ran towards the way he came. Shen Yu was confused. She even called Shen Zhao several times but got no response, so she had no choice but to follow him. Fortunately, they did not run very far, and the quarrel on the roadside was not over when Shen Zhao returned. This year was not peaceful, with bandits everywhere. The grooms and maids were wary of the sudden arrival of people, so they stopped arguing, staring at the people coming. Shen Zhao's clothes were wrapped in ashes, he was wearing a power fence, and there was a knife hanging on the side of his horse's back. He suddenly stopped on the side of the road, which would make anyone alert. The maid thought she had met a gangster. Just as she was about to move to the carriage, she heard the man shout uncertainly, Ying-er. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 207. The people in the carriage were shocked when they heard the sound and quickly opened the curtain. Although she couldn't see her face through the power fence, her eyes suddenly turned red and she tried her best to hold it back. Shen Zhao lifted the fence and asked in a deep voice, why are you here? There are refugees and bandits everywhere on this road, why are you running out again? Yuan Kai sniffed, smiled, and said, I'm going to Ping Cheng to visit relatives. Shen Zhao looked around and asked, where are your followers? Why didn't the family send someone to escort them? Just as Ying-er was about to speak, Yuan Kai jumped in and said, we met a bandit on the road and got separated. Fortunately, we will arrive in Ping Cheng soon. Shen Zhao saw her haggard face and didn't dare to think about how much hardship she had suffered on the road. The coachman looked at her with a stern look, and he was not her family's coachman. What were you arguing about just now? Ying-er said angrily, he won't leave even after we've agreed on a price. He won't send us into the city until we ask for a higher price. How can there be such a person? Seeing that the visitor was not easy to deal with, the coachman quickly apologized and said, it's hard to do business these days, so the price we offered really only goes so far. Shen Zhao glanced at the coachman with a sullen face, and the coachman was suddenly frightened. No, it's really not a lie. Shen Zhao pulled the reins and approached the carriage, stretched out his hand towards Yuan Kaiu. Come up, I will take you into the city. He held Yuan Kaiu's hand and held the waist with the other hand, then lifted the person onto the horse and placed him in front of him. Shen Yu had followed her a long time ago and stopped not far away to watch. Seeing this, she stepped forward and said, "Are you Miss Yu's maid? I'll take you for a ride." Riding a horse was much faster than a carriage. We entered the city before dark and stayed in an inn. Shen Yu finished washing and went to Shen Zhao's room. "Miss Yu, what are you going to do?" Shen Zhao's hair was still wet and he said, "I have asked her and her maid. I will send her to a relative's house tomorrow and we will continue to Hezhu." "Are you stubborn?" "What's wrong?" Shen Zhao was confused. "If she really wants to go to a relative's house, she can go as soon as she enters the city. Why does she stay in an inn with us?" Shen Yu sat down opposite him. "Also, have you seen her baggage?" "I saw it," Shen Zhao said. "Shen Yu is really in trouble," she said. "She met bandits and got separated from her servants. She was still able to carry her luggage when the carriage was gone. In my opinion, she probably ran out secretly. You'd better ask, just ask." Shen Zhao thought to herself, if it wasn't to visit relatives, what could she do? Could it be that he left her and came after her? But they had obviously said goodbye that day. After all, men are not as careful as women. He can deduce the art of war, but he is really clueless when it comes to women's minds. The woman he had interacted with the most over the years had a carefree and talkative temperament. He didn't know that the woman's mind could be twisted in all directions. "I'll ask her." Shen Zhao stood up. "Don't ask her," Shen Yu said, "since she told you about visiting relatives, she just wants to hide it from you. You'd better ask her maid." Shen Yu returned to her room. After a long time, she was ready to sleep when Shen Zhao knocked on her door. Shen Zhao at the door looked very depressed. "Let's talk." Shen Yu pointed her chin. Shen Zhao looked over and smiled immediately. "Wine has been prepared on the table for a long time. In the past, when the two brothers and sisters wanted to talk, they would prepare a pot of wine and chat while drinking. Go to the roof." Yes, Shen Yu smiled and nodded lightly. She picked up the wine pot, Shen Zhao took the wine glass, and the two of them climbed onto the roof quietly. "Is there a problem?" Yes, Shen Zhao held out the cup for her to pour wine. She was kicked out of the Yu family. Shen Yu said yeah and just wanted to be a listener. Shen Zhao raised his head and drank, and continued, "She has been kicked out a long time ago. I never knew that every time I sent her back to the back door of Yu mansion, she would wait for me to leave before going to her rented yard." Shen Zhao lowered his head and two tears fell silently. "Is it because she always comes out to find you?" Shen Yu guessed. Shen Zhao nodded. "Her family is not just a few people like ours. The Yu family is an aristocratic family with strong family traditions. There are 4 or 5 girls in the Yu family. When she went to Yan Liangwen last year, Taifu Yu became furious. After returning to Beijing, she went out frequently. Taifu Yu asked people to follow her, and then they discovered Shen Zhao's traces. Taifu Yu asked her to break up with Shen Zhao, but she refused and was kicked out of the house to sever ties with her. The family thought that if they let her go out to endure hardships, she would turn back, but it turned out that she lived outside and did not go back. As soon as Shen Zhao left Beijing, she followed him. When they met on the roadside, she thought that she had nothing now and was no longer the golden person she once was. She couldn't help but lie, saying that she was going to Pingcheng to visit relatives. Shen Zhao stretched out the cup, and Shen Yu filled another cup for him. Shen Zhao suddenly called her. Shen Zhao looked sideways at her. "Before the expedition last year, you said you had a dream. Did the dream come true?" Shen Yu slowly exhaled the breath from her chest. "Half of it came true. In the dream, I didn't go to Yan Liangwen. You left, and so did my father. I was the only one left. Except that you are still alive, there is no difference. Shen Zhao was silent for a long time. What about you after I die? Me, Shen Yu smiled and drank the wine. I was given a marriage to Zhang Lianzi, and I drowned in a small lake in Zhang Mansion 3 years later. Shen Zhao took a few breaths, his heart aching terribly. What about late autumn? When I got married, she came to add to my beauty. When I died, she was not married. Shen Zhao wiped his face and said, I want to take her back to Hezhu. If you don't bring it, I will bring it too, and I will scold you on the road with her. Shen Yu handed over the wine bottle. Shen Zhao smiled and turned away with tears on his face. He owed too many people. The brother and sister did not drink too much and set out for Hezhu early the next morning. Yuan Kai had never traveled on horseback before, and originally planned for Shen Yu to go first. Shen Zhao bought a carriage and took Yuan Kai's master and servant to follow later. Yuan Kai was worried that it would delay their trip, so he insisted on not agreeing, so Shen Zhao took the lead. On the way, she ran on the road for 3 days without complaining of pain. It was only on the 4th day that Shen Zhao discovered that something was wrong with her walking. The maid said that her thighs were worn out by riding horses, but she did not complain of pain. How could a young lady from an aristocratic family with a delicate body and expensive body have ever suffered such hardship? Shen Zhao wanted to stop and let her rest, so she threatened not to go to Hezhu. Yuan Kai endured the nearly 1-month journey, and even Shen Yu admired her. Hezhu is a big city. It is the birthplace of the Lu family, as well as business roads and shipping ports. This place is not like the refugees along the way. Instead, it is peaceful with singing and dancing. The boats on the river are full of young men who spend a lot of money and live in a drunken life. Who knows what kind of life the people outside are living? Mrs. Lu knew they were coming and sent someone early to wait for them on the official road. The old lady stood at the door, surrounded by a group of maids. Looking at the horses approaching, Mrs. Lu took 2 steps forward and said with tears in her eyes, Auntie, Zhao is finally here. Shen Yu's eyes were hot. She had not seen her grandmother for 4 years in her past life and this life. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 208. Shen Yu saw the old lady from afar, and the tearful red girl beside her. She ran closer, dismounted from her horse, and threw off the reins. Grandma. Auntie Mrs. Lu wanted to go down the steps to get a closer look at her, but she almost missed her step and was held by Shen Yu, who rushed over. The grandfather and grandson held hands and looked at each other. The old lady was already in tears. Shen Yu's eyes were red, but there were too many people at the door, so she held back her tears. It'll be good to come back, it'll be good to come back. Old Mrs. Lu looked her up and down and said, why have you lost so much weight? It's because I've grown taller. Shen Yu stepped up and stood on the same step as her grandmother. She was indeed half a head taller than the old lady. Old Mrs. Lu cried and laughed, I have grown a lot taller. Shen Zhao hugged Yuan Kai and dismounted, crossed his arms and watched the grandparents and grandsons exchanging greetings. Hey, Shen Zhao said, if you dare to love me, just call me because I am worthy of my name. Old lady, are you too partial? Mrs. Lu laughed and stretched out her hand towards him. Shen Zhao put down his arms and walked over. Knowing that he was tall, he took the initiative to bend down in front of Mrs. Lu and put his head close to let her touch her. Mrs. Lu touched his head and couldn't help but cry again when she saw his thin shoulders. A person next to me advised, Mom, the doctor said you are not in good health, so don't get too excited. The person who spoke was Mrs. Lu's adoptive son from the clan. Although he was not his biological son, he was regarded as Shen Yu's uncle Lu Shi. Standing next to him was a woman and a young man, Lu Jiahen, Lu Shi's son. Shen Yu said hello one by one, uncle, aunt, cousin. Hey, Aunt Zhang responded, wiping the unnecessary tears from the corner of her eyes with a handkerchief. Sister, I'm finally back. The old lady has been looking forward to her day and night, and finally she has someone here. Lu Jiahen handed over his hand and said, my cousin and cousin have suffered along the way. Yuan Kai looked at the happy family in front of him and felt that he was in a situation where he could not speak up and his status was embarrassing. She had thought about these scenes along the way, and even thought about them more, but when she really stood here, she regretted coming. Shen Zhao seemed to have noticed something. When he turned around and saw Yuan Kai stopped moving forward, he felt that he was not careful enough. Late Chiu he walked over and took her hand, leading him to the old lady. Grandma, this is. He didn't know what to call her appropriately. If he said it too close, he would be afraid that Yuan Kai would think she was frivolous. If he said it too far, he would be afraid that others would look down on her. It's my sister-in-law. Shen Yu took his words and told a white lie. They have already performed a simple ceremony in the capital. When they return to Hezhu, they will have to be arranged by my grandmother to avoid wronging my sister-in-law. Yuan Kai's face turned red instantly, but she was grateful to Shen Yu, so her identity was not so embarrassing. The old lady looked at Yuan Kai with a kind look and smiled. She said good repeatedly while smiling. She took Yuan Kai's hand and patted the back of her hand before handing it to Shen Zhao. Shen Yu helped old Mrs. Lu. Grandma, it's windy outside, please go inside first. Look at me, Mrs. Lu said, I'm so happy that I forgot. Old Mrs. Lu is over 70 this year. In fact, her health is not bad. She was really ill a few days ago. Shen Yu was in Beijing at that time and was worried about how to send Shen Zhao away. The letter from Hezhu arrived. It was timely rain. After such a long time, the disease was cured. Shen Yu helped old Mrs. Lu walk in front. After walking for a while, the old lady remembered and turned around and said, you don't need to follow me. Au and Zhao have been running all the way and have to rest for a while before catching the wind and washing away the dust in the evening. Even Shen Zhao blushed because of the word couple. He glanced at Yuan Kai beside him and saw her head slightly lowered, her ears already red. I. He hesitated. Yuan Kai slightly raised his head to look at him and whispered, I know. Old Mrs. Lu waited at the door all morning. Shen Yu helped old Mrs. Lu back to the hospital to rest. The Lu mansion is huge, even bigger than the prince's mansion in the north of the capital. There is a small hill in the backyard, and there are all kinds of pavilions and pavilions. Mrs. Lu chatted with Shen Yu for a while, asking questions from Balan Prince's palace to Balan Crown Prince. I heard that he is not in good health. Is it true? Shen Yu said, it's not particularly bad. You can't see it when you're not sick. That's good, that's good. Old Mrs. Lu leaned back on the pillow with confidence, it won't affect fertility. Ouch, I accidentally said what I was thinking. Old Mrs. Lu patted her head, look, my brain is getting worse as I get older. Grandma. Shen Yu prolonged her tone with a speechless expression. When Mrs. Lu was doing business in her early years, she also followed her men around the country. Naturally, her thoughts were not restricted by ordinary women in the boudoir, and she was open-minded about everything. Let's not talk about you first, let's talk about your brother. Old Mrs. Lu said again, what about your sister-in-law? I think she is a lovely girl, and she is beautiful. She is worthy of our Zhao. It doesn't matter what your family background is. Our family doesn't seek power and wealth, and we don't lack money. My brother is a high-ranking one. Shen Yu said matter-of-factly, my sister-in-law is the direct daughter of Teifu Yu's family. Mrs. Lu thought about it, The Yu family is a big family. That's right, Shen Yu nodded. Then she can be sent to the palace to become a royal concubine. That's right, Shen Yu said, my brother is a military general who has been away from home all year round. No rich lady would be willing to follow her around. And at that time, everyone thought that my brother was gone. Miss Yu traveled thousands of miles from Shengjing to Yanliangguan, has been looking for someone for several months. Besides, Shen Yu specially picked the one and praised Yu Wankaiu so much that the grandfather and grandson chatted for a while. Old Mrs. Lu felt sleepy and fell asleep while talking. Shen Yu put down the tent gently, and as soon as she stepped out the door, Shen Zhao pulled her to the side. Didn't Grandma ask you to have a rest? Shen Yu asked in surprise. Shen Zhao looked helpless. You said that, the maid arranged for Miss Yu and me to live in a courtyard, and I. Wouldn't that be better? What's good? Shen Zhao pulled her away, lowered his voice and reprimanded, you are ruining her reputation. Shen Yu rolled her eyes at him, you are really a martial artist. How do I say this? Shen Yu raised her head slightly, then let me ask you, if I don't say this, what are you going to say? Shen Zhao said seriously, just say that I am in love with her and want to ask my grandmother to make the decision. Shen Yu really wanted to give Shen Zhao a hammer to wake him up. If you say this, it will be difficult for her to raise her head in the house from now on. Shen Zhao really didn't understand these twists and turns in the inner house. What do you mean? Coming all the way to Hezhu with you without a matchmaker or retainer is like eloping with you. What will others think of her? Shen Zhao thought about it and shouted, they dare. I dare not do it in front of you, but what about behind your back? Shen Zhao was silent, and he had to admit that she was right. Shen Yu patted his arm, I just complimented my sister-in-law in there, you have to treat me to a drink tomorrow. Shen Zhao knew her intention of doing this. If he marries Yu Wankaiu will be with the old lady at home in the future. Shen Yu has established a good relationship with her and left a good impression as a foundation, so that they can get along with each other better in the future. Shen Zhao looked at her. Aha, you, go back quickly, Shen Yu urged. Sister Yu has just arrived in the house, and everything is not familiar to her yet. She is very sensitive. She will think too much if you run out like this. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 209. Shen Zhao's expression was serious, I have never been in contact with any women, and I don't understand their thoughts. If my brother does something wrong, or if he neglects you because of others, just tell me. I know. Shen Yu winked at her, just don't forget to treat me to a drink. Shen Zhao nodded and left. When he walked to the moon cave door, he looked back and saw only Shen Yu's straight back. He suddenly felt sad. The little girl running behind him has grown into a big girl. She doesn't need his brother to take care of her and can fly high. Shen Yu walked to her yard, thinking that Shen Zhao had really never been in contact with any women, so it was normal for him not to understand. Wrong. She paused, then why did Xieting Zhou know so much? Is it possible? Hongqiao, Shen Yu shouted loudly, the pen and ink are waiting for me, I want to write a letter. The guards received Xieting Zhou's order and escorted him almost every step of the way. When they arrived at the Lu mansion, they also took turns changing guard. Hongqiao and the maid prepared water, and Shen Yu washed herself up. When she saw the women's clothes on the side, she picked them up and put them down again. Put it away, Shen Yu ordered, change into men's clothes. Hongqiao was stunned. Although the young lady often wore men's clothes in the past, she would still change back to women's clothes once she returned to Hezhu. Shen Yu sat in front of the mirror, with Hongqiao behind her using a handkerchief to wet her hair. How have you been in the past year? Shen Yu looked at Hongqiao in the mirror. Hongqiao's eyes were red. Okay, the old lady loves her house and treats her slaves very well. The young lady and Liu Yao are suffering outside. Shen Yu said, I was in a hurry and didn't have time to take her with me, but I have informed her in advance. She should be on her way to Hezhu by now. Lu Zai has not been so lively for a long time, and everyone is busy trying to catch the wind and wash away the dust for them. Before the old lady stepped through the door, she noticed that the atmosphere was unusual. The servants all bowed their heads and remained silent, and there was no lively chatter in the hall. There were 5 tables in the hall, but when Mrs. Lu came in, less than 3 tables were seated. Mrs. Lu's face suddenly darkened. Shen Yu understood instantly and helped the old lady sit down. Did the 3rd and 5th bedrooms go and shout? Old Mrs. Lu asked. The maid hurriedly replied, I've asked you. The 3rd wife said she had a headache, and the 5th wife also said she had a headache. Mrs. Lu sneered, it hurt so much. Mrs. Zhang said, Mother, my daughter-in-law went to see Sanfang when she heard that she had a headache, but... Speak directly if you have anything to say. Yes, Mrs. Zhang said, the news about my sister in Beijing has now spread to Hezhu. I guess they are afraid that they will be implicated in the incident in Beijing. Snapped. Mrs. Lu slapped her hand on the table. Her voice was not loud, but she was so frightened that no one dared to speak. The money is not short, I'm afraid I will be implicated now. Grandma, don't be angry. Shen Yu stroked old Mrs. Lu's back. A good dinner was ruined like this. Everyone in the room was silent and only dared to bury their heads in eating, not even daring to touch the bowl with their chopsticks. The moon had risen, and Shen Yu coaxed Mrs. Lu to sleep. Shen Zhao was leaning on the corridor waiting for her. When he saw Shen Yu coming out, he raised the riding whip in his hand. It's still early, why don't you go out for a run? Okay, Shen Yu said. The two of them rode out of Hezhu city, speeding up as soon as they left the city, leaving the dim lights behind them. The horses' hooves faced the wind and ran wildly under the moonlit night. Shen Yu stepped down from her bed, and she had stayed in Hezhu since she asked Hong Qiao to go to Hezhu to adjust grain. The night was getting colder, but the brothers and sisters were all sweating profusely. They hadn't raced so happily in a long time. Shen Yu reined in her horse at the end of the previous horse race and looked back at Shen Zhao, who was one step behind. Your horse is not as good as mine, so I lose this round. Shen Zhao smiled and said, you must pull your horse out for a run, and you are only half a body ahead of me. Shen Yu got off the horse and touched Ben Xiao, you've made me so fat. Shen Zhao went up to the hill first, sat down on a stone, and threw a wine bag to her. You saw it today too? Yes, Shen Yu nodded, our arrival seems to make this place uneasy. Shen Zhao looked sideways at her, then what are you going to do next? However, Shen Yu did not answer, looking at the two pacing horses under the moonlight. She thought of Xie Tingzhou, who had been separated for a month. She wondered if he was in Bailin now, and if he encountered any danger along the way. Hey, girl! Shen Zhao touched her with his elbow. Shen Yu came back to her senses and said, what do I care about them? I came to visit my grandmother, not them. I can't stay for too long. If they don't mess with me during this period, they will live their lives as usual. If they dare to do anything, you are so evil, don't blame me for not caring about that shallow family affection. Shen Zhao rubbed her head and said, my sister is so capable. Don't rub it. Shen Yu straightened her hair. It's all messed up. It was already blown like a chicken coop by the wind, but you still find it objectionable that I try to straighten it out for you. Shen Zhao retracted his hand with a smile and looked into the distance, the smile on his face gradually fading. It's getting cold, he said. Shen Yu knew that Shen Zhao must have had his intentions when he suddenly asked her to go out of the city to play a game. What do you want to say? Shen Zhao thought for a moment, I want to give my back to you. Before Shen Yu could speak, he continued, when the weather cools down, the Zhihu people are likely to launch an attack on the border. Yanliang Pass, Jingmen Pass, and Yuchen along the line may all become targets of their attack. Shen Yu vaguely guessed what Shen Zhao wanted to do, but she didn't speak. I failed miserably there and I wanted to pick up where I fell. But you have no soldiers, Shen Yu said. I don't have one, Shen Zhaok said, but there is at Yanliang Pass, where there are now 40,000 garrison troops. Shen Yu pursed her lips tightly. I hate that place. I lost my father there and the soldiers who fought alongside me. Why do we have to defend the city for them? Shen Zhao's voice was very calm. After I recovered from my injury this year, I went to Yanliang Pass. The people built a tomb for my father outside the city. What you don't know is that there are more than 60 people who built it next to my tomb. Tomb. Shen Yu looked at him with confusion and waited quietly for the next step. Shen Zhao said, those were the garrison and ordinary people who wanted to open the city gate for us during that battle. I heard about their deeds there. They went up with hose and poles and died. One group after another added more people, until more than 60 corpses blocked the passage and they could not open the door. The common people are not ignorant. They can distinguish between right and wrong, good and evil. The city guard is dead, Liang Jianfang is dead, Ji Liangji, Li Yanchang, and other officials involved in this case have also been arrested. There is only one Xian left. Ping Hao. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding.